Welcome to my Bedtime History channel. Tonight you are not watching the past, you are living inside it. You wake up in a world that does not belong to you, and it will not explain itself. You stand upon the edge of a continent that is about to change its mind. The air is crisp and filled with the scent of ancient dust and the sweet promise of melting snow. To your north, the Laurentide ice sheet rises into the sky like a great white god, stretching from the Arctic to the place where New York will one day rise. It is 2 miles thick and so heavy that it crushes the very earth beneath your feet. You can feel the tremendous weight of this frozen world pressing down into the bedrock, creating a deep thrumming vibration in your chest. You turn your eyes toward the south, where the tundra is giving way to vast grasslands teeming with life. The sun is pale but warm on your shoulders as you watch the great herds moving across the horizon like slow-moving clouds. It is 12,800 years ago, and the world is finally beginning to breathe again. After tens of thousands of years locked in ice, you watch the grasses sway in a gentle breeze, feeling the shift in the atmosphere as the planet relaxes into a new season. There is an indescribable peace in this moment of warming and expansion. You feel the texture of the frozen soil beneath your furs, noticing how the ice is giving way to the softness of damp earth. For generations, your people have watched the glaciers pull back just a few inches every year, reclaiming land that has been hidden for millennia. You breathe in the cold moisture of the atmosphere, feeling a sense of immense curiosity about the lands that are opening up before you. The world feels infinite and full of potential, as if you are standing at the very beginning of history. The struggle for survival seems to be softening into something else entirely. You notice the sound of a distant waterfall roaring from the face of the great ice sheet as it weeps into the valleys below. This is the sound of the planet waking up its great frozen heart, melting in the warmth of a new era. You watch the birds soaring overhead, their wings catching the light of a sun that no longer feels like a stranger. There is a feeling of deep belonging in this environment, as if your body was designed for this specific transition from dark to light. You believe in the stability of this new world and the promise of the endless summer. You look down at your hands, seeing the rough skin and the scars of a life spent navigating the harsh realities of the Pleistocene. There is a cognitive bias within you that suggests the future will simply be an extension of this improving present. You imagine your children walking across even greener fields and hunting even plumper game, under a sun that will never again hide behind the ice. The illusion of permanent progress is a comforting blanket that you wrap around your shoulders as you survey your territory. You do not yet understand that you are standing on the brink of a catastrophe. You hear the distant cry of a woolly mammoth, its voice echoing off the ice walls like a trumpet from another dimension. The great beast is moving slowly, its tusks heavy with the weight of decades, and its shaggy coat thick with the dust of the steppe. You feel a moment of quiet reflection as you realize that both you and the mammoth are products of this specific frozen reality. There is a deep connection between your survival and the movement of these massive creatures across the changing landscape. You watch them with a mixture of awe and pragmatism, knowing they are the architects of this world. You begin to sense a subtle shift in the quality of the light as the afternoon fades into a long lavender twilight. The temperature drops just enough to remind you of the power of the ice, but it no longer feels threatening. You walk back toward the warmth of your campfire, feeling the safety of your small community tucked away in the vastness. The rhythms of life seem predictable and certain, as regular as the stars that are now beginning to appear. In the deepening blue above, you close your eyes, feeling the weight of the day falling away into the soft darkness. You settle into the furs of your sleeping place, feeling the rhythmic breathing of your kin as they drift into slumber around you. The earth breathes with you, its great frozen lungs expanding and contracting in a cycle that has lasted for generations. You reflect on the nature of your freedom and how it is, tethered to the survival of the herds and the mercy of the sun. The illusion of a predictable world is the only reality you have ever known, and you embrace it with every breath. You do not see the shadow of the future approaching across the vast, cold void of space. You feel the gentle pull of sleep as the silence of the tundra becomes a hypnotic lullaby that wraps around your mind. There is no fear in this darkness, only the quiet satisfaction of a day spent in harmony with the natural order of things. You contemplate the meaning of your presence in this vast tapestry of ice and stone and grass. The history of your people is written in the soil and the snow, waiting to be read by someone in a future you cannot imagine. For now you are simply a part of the living earth, waiting for the dawn to break. The memory of the cold is a ghost that still haunts the edge of every warm dream. The size of a creature is often the only map of the world it truly needs. You wake up to a sound that is less of a noise and more of a displacement of the air around you. As you step out into the light, you see a Colombian mammoth standing only 100 feet from your shelter. It is a mountain of meat and hair standing 14 feet tall at the shoulder, weighing 10 tons. Its tusks are masterpieces of ancient ivory, curving 16 feet through the air like scythes designed for a war against the trees. You can smell the heavy, musky scent of its great body, a mixture of pressed grass and wet earth. It grinds its massive teeth with a sound like two stones rubbing together in the dark. You move through the edge of the forest where the mastodons browse on the branches of conifers, using their peculiar cone-shaped teeth to strip away the greenery. Nearby, a giant ground sloth rears up on its hind legs, reaching for the high leaves of a willow tree. It weighs 4 tons and possesses claws capable of tearing through solid wood with the ease of a knife through fat. You feel a strange sense of displacement, realizing that you are the smallest significant thing in this landscape of titans. The sloth does not even look at you, its eyes fixed on the satiety of the moment in a world where bulk is the ultimate form of safety. You feel a prickle of sudden dread along your spine as you catch a movement in the tall grass beyond the clearing. A short-faced bear stands up, testing the wind, with a nose that can catch the scent of blood from miles away. It stands 12 feet tall on its hind legs, its long legs built for running down prey across the open plains at terrifying speeds. This is not the slow-moving bear of your dreams, but a specialized killing machine, refined by thousands of years of evolutionary pressure. You freeze, realizing that your only defense is stillness and the hope that the wind stays in your favor. The tension is a cold wire wrapped around your heart. You listen to the distance where the dire wolves howl, in a precise coordination that makes your own group efforts feel amateur. They are larger and more robust than any wolf you have seen in your modern memories, with jaws capable of snapping the leg bones of a bison like dry kindling. Somewhere in the shadows of the thicket, a saber-toothed cat prowls, its enormous canine teeth tucked behind its lips like hidden daggers. You understand that these predators do not hunt out of malice, but out of a perfect alignment with the necessity of the meat. Their presence is a constant reminder that to live in this world is to be part of a very specific and dangerous geometry. You find yourself by the edge of a river where a giant beaver, the size of a black bear, is building a dam that could divert a stream for a century. Nearby, an armored glyptodon grazes peacefully, its shell looking like a great stone dome resting on the grass. It is the size of a small vehicle, impenetrable and indifferent to the drama of the predators nearby. You realize that this is an age of abundance where every niche is filled by a giant version of reality. The ecosystem is not struggling to survive, but is overfilled with the vitality of a planet that has finally found its rhythm in the thaw. You look up into the infinite blue sky, where teratorns, with 12-foot wingspans, soar on the thermals rising from the warming Earth. They are condor-like birds that watch the world, with piercing clarity, waiting for the remains of a kill, or perhaps seeking small prey to carry away into the crags of the mountains. You feel the vulnerability of your body exposed beneath that great eye, realizing that, in this world, the threat can come from the earth or the air at any moment. The scale of these birds makes the very clouds seem smaller, as if the living world is competing with the landscape for dominance over the horizon. You experience a deep sense of humility as you realize your place within this hierarchy of monsters. Your desire for safety and belonging is complicated by the fact that you live in a world where everything is larger than your understanding. You notice how your people move with a quiet grace, never wasting energy, always aware of the sound of a breaking branch or the shift of the wind. There is a cognitive bias within you that sees these giants as eternal features of the land, like the mountains or the rivers. You cannot conceive of a world where these massive heartbeats will one day stop forever, leaving behind only a terrible silence. You reflect on the nature of power and how it is distributed across this wild frontier. To be a mammoth is to possess the earth, but to be a human is to observe it with a growing complexity. You wonder if the meaning of life is found in the strength of the tusk, or in the sharpness of the mind that learns to navigate the spaces between the giants. There is an illusion of reality here that suggests weight and bone are the ultimate truths. Yet you feel a flickering awareness that your ability to share stories and cooperate might be a different kind of magnitude altogether. Survival is a dance of knowledge played out under the feet of the titans. You sense the subtle connection between this ancient world and the one you will one day leave behind. These animals walk over the very ground where concrete and steel will eventually smother the soil. Their bones are pressed into the earth beneath your modern cities, waiting to be found by future eyes that will struggle to believe such magnitude ever existed. You feel the weight of time pressing down on you, realizing that every civilization is built over the graveyards of giants. The landscape you walk upon today is a layered map of forgotten monarchs and the dust of 1,000,000 massive hearts. The earth remembers the weight of every footstep, even after the walker has vanished into the dust. Skill is the only currency that never loses its value in the wild. You sit near the heart of the camp, watching the elder work, a piece of translucent chert with the focus of a creator making a world. The sound of stone striking stone is rhythmic and sharp, echoing against the nearby trees like the ticking of a primal clock. You observe the tiny flakes of flint falling into the dust, each one a discarded fragment of a vision that is gradually taking shape. There is a deep conformity in this act, as if the entire history of your people is being compressed into the sharp edges of a single tool. You feel the heat of the fire on your face, while the cold air of the Pleistocene nips at your back, creating a perfect balance of sensory reality. You reach out to touch, a finished Clovis point feeling the impossible sharpness of its flaked edges against your thumb. It is symmetrical and aerodynamic, crafted with a sophistication that challenges your modern understanding of ancient capability. The telltale flute or channel running up both faces is a work of mathematical precision designed to allow the point to be hafted securely to a spear shaft. This is not merely a weapon but a piece of high technology that represents the pinnacle of thousands of years of human ingenuity. You realize that this stone is the only thing standing between your small, fragile body and the 10-ton giants that rule the grasslands beyond your fire. You prepare for the hunt feeling, the tightness in your chest that only comes when you are about to face the unknown. Coordination is the secret language of your survival as you and your kin move in a silent line through the tall yellow grass. There is no room for ego or individual glory here, because one misstep could mean the death of the entire group. You watch. The signals passed, with subtle hand movements, feeling the deep psychological pull to conform to the strategy laid out by those who have survived more winters than you. The human desire for security is anchored entirely in this collective movement toward the great mammoths standing in the distance. You approach the target, moving downwind to keep your human scent hidden from the giant whose nose is as sensitive as a whisper. The illusion of control is strong within you as you hold your spear, feeling the weight of the stone point ready to deliver a killing blow. You notice the way the sun glints off the mammoth's tusks and the way the ground trembles slightly with every massive step the creature takes. This is a conflict between pure biological mass and the collective intelligence of a primal tribe. You realize that human nature across time has always been defined by this audacious willingness to challenge the impossible through shared knowledge and courage. The kill is messy and vital, a heavy physical reality that demands every ounce of your strength and respect. You work with the others to process the massive body, using stone blades to slice through thick hide and dense muscle with systematic efficiency. There is a profound sense of meaning in this labor as you realize that every part of this great animal will sustain your people through the coming moon. The meat will feed the children, the hide will become warm tents, and the bone will be carved into needles and tools. You are no longer just an observer, but a vital link in the great chain of life and death that defines your reality. You watch the women sewing together animal hides, using bone needles and thread made from sinew, with a precision that is almost hypnotic. The clothing they create is perfectly adapted to the extreme cold of this world, providing the only protection between you and the relentless winds off the ice sheets. This sophistication is not found in abstract theories, but in the calloused fingers and the steady breath of those who refuse to be defeated by the environment. You see the delicate stitches and the ornate decorations, feeling a modern connection to the human need to create beauty, even in the midst of a struggle for bare survival. You realize that your world is connected by invisible threads of trade and travel that stretch across hundreds of miles of wild territory. The high-quality stone in your hand might have come from a quarry 10 days' journey to the north, carried through forests and across rivers by distant kin. There is no isolation in your world, only a vast network of shared resources and cultural traditions that bind you to people you have never met. This is the great human experiment of collaboration scaling beyond the immediate campfire into a continent-spanning reality. You feel the weight of these connections, knowing that your individual life is part of a much larger collective narrative. The feeling of dominance is a subtle intoxication that colors every thought as you stand at the top of this ancient food chain. Despite your small stature and lack of claws or tusks, you move through the landscape with the confidence of a king because of the tools you carry. This is the cognitive bias of the successful predator, believing that your methods are flawless and your future is secure. You watch the other predators, like the saber-toothed cats, from a distance, feeling a strange kind of kinship rather than pure terror. You believe you have mastered the world and that the great thaw will only bring more success to your flourishing culture. You sit under the vast night sky, reflecting on the fragility of this illusion of control in a world ruled by the sun and the ice. Human nature is to build houses of tradition in the shadow of volcanic realities, hoping that our rituals will keep the storm at bay. You wonder if the meaning of life is found in the perfect shape of a spear point or in the quiet moments of peace by the fire after a successful hunt. Freedom is a distant concept compared to the immediate demands of survival, yet you feel a spark of something more deep within your soul. The reality of the Pleistocene is a harsh but beautiful master that demands your full presence. You feel the rhythmic beating of your own heart, noticing how it aligns with the distant thrumming of the melting ice sheets to the north. This is a world in transition, moving away from the dark cold of the past toward a bright and uncertain future. You imagine the generations to come finding your stone points in the soil long after your name has been forgotten by the wind. There is a quiet majesty in this thought, realizing that your craftsmanship is a message sent forward through time to those who will one day inherit this continent. You close your eyes, feeling the weight of the stone in your hand one last time before sleep. The stone point in your hand is a promise written to a future that has not yet been born. The breath of the planet can turn from a warm sigh to a frozen gasp in a single lifetime. You wake up one morning and realize the dew has not simply settled, but has shattered into a billion needle-like shards of ice. This is not the usual cold of a passing season, but a deep and penetrational chill that seems to come from the very bones of the earth. For generations, your ancestors have told stories of the great retreating ice, but now you notice the air is moving in the wrong direction. The subtle warmth that once encouraged the grasslands to expand is being replaced by a biting wind that carries the scent of a frozen north that refuses to stay away. You feel a sense of discomfort settling in your marrow like a heavy stone. You walk to the edge of the river and see that the rushing meltwater has become sluggish and thick with gritty slush. The vibrant green of the willow shoots is withering before they can even fully unfurl under the pale sun. There is a strange silence in the atmosphere, as if the birds and insects have forgotten their songs in the face of this unexpected returning winter. Your body remembers the stories of stability, but your senses are reporting a massive betrayal by the natural world. This is the beginning of what scientists call the Younger Dryas, a period where the warming world suddenly snaps backward into the dark cold of the deepest ice age. You experience the human fear of isolation as you realize your old strategies for survival are losing their effectiveness. The cognitive bias within you insists that this is just a particularly long winter and that the spring must be right around the corner. You watch your elders staring at the horizon with eyes that reveal a growing dread because they recognize a pattern that does not belong in this era. The conformity of your tribe is now your only shield as you all huddle closer, to the fire searching for answers in the flickering shadows. The illusion of a predictable environment is dissolving, leaving you exposed to the raw and unpredictable whims of a changing planetary thermostat. You notice a small, delicate white flower clinging to the windswept tundra where nothing else can seem to survive. This is the Dryas octopetala, a resilient Arctic bloom that thrives only in the most brutal cold, and now it is appearing everywhere. Its 8 petals are like small ghosts of the summer you once knew, signifying a world that is rewinding its own history. In Europe and North America, the pollen of this flower will be trapped in the mud of lakes for 12,000 years, telling the story of this precise moment. You touch the waxy leaves, feeling the texture of a reality that favors the hardy over the plentiful. The world is becoming brittle and sharp. You feel the physical experience of hunger beginning to gnaw at your stomachs as the great herds alter their migration routes. The mammoths and bison are moving in erratic patterns, searching for the grasses that are no longer growing in their usual abundance. You spend more time searching for fuel for your fires, realizing that every branch is now more precious than the gold of a future age. The internal thought process of your people is shifting from expansion to survival mode as you realize the territory you once ruled is becoming alien to you. Every breath you take is visible in the air, a cloud of life, trying to persist in a world that is turning into ice. You reflect on the freedom of the warming years and how quickly it has been exchanged for the prison of the frost. Human nature across time is defined by this struggle to adapt to changes that occur faster than our understanding can process. The reality of this cold snap is not a gradual descent, but a violent flicking of a switch in the North Atlantic currents. You are living inside a climate collapse where the very ocean has stalled its movement, depriving your continent of the heat it needs to thrive. You wonder if life has any permanent meaning when the seasons themselves can be wiped away by the breaking of an invisible current in the deep blue sea. You observe the movement of the stars, thinking they look brighter and colder than they ever did in the years of the Great Thaw. The desire for belonging within your tribe intensifies as the external world becomes more hostile and unforgiving to the solitary wanderer. You realize that the meaning of life in this frozen moment is simply to be the hand that keeps the fire burning through the longest night. There is a modern connection to your struggle in the way people today still seek comfort in shared stories during the darkest transitions of their lives. You are the living bridge between two worlds, one that is dying and one that refuses to be born for another 1,000 years. You close your eyes and imagine the heat of the sun as a distant memory rather than a present reality. The psychological depth of this endurance is a weight that you carry with every step across the hardened earth. You realize that human nature is forged in these periods of intense pressure, where the choice between death and adaptation is the only one that matters. The illusion of reality you once held has been replaced by the sharp truth of the wind and the silence of the disappearing birds. You settle into your huddled position within the shelter, feeling the rhythmic breath of your people as they dream of a spring that will not return in their lifetime. The great winter does not ask permission before it claims the land for its own. The heavens do not always watch the earth with indifference. You stand in a clearing near the edge of the great forest, feeling the comfort of a world that has finally found its rhythm. The morning sun is gentle, warming the back of your neck as you work on a new spear shaft of seasoned ash wood. Your children are playing near the smoke of the campfire, laughing at the antics of a young dog, chasing a squirrel through the underbrush. There is an illusion of safety. In this domestic scene, a belief that the patterns of your ancestors will continue forever without interruption. You do not notice the subtle thinning of the air or the way the birds have suddenly gone silent in the high canopy. You look up to the sky and witness a sight that defies every story ever told around your people's fires. A second sun has appeared in the north brighter than the eye can endure, and traveling at a speed that makes the flight of an arrow seem like the crawl of a snail. It is not a single light, but a cluster of fireballs screaming through the atmosphere, leaving trails of incandescent gas behind them. You feel a wave of intense heat wash over your face, even though the objects are hundreds of miles away, in the distant upper reaches of the heavens. Your internal thought process freezes, in a moment of pure biological terror, as the blue sky turns to plasma. You experience the impact not as a sound but as a physical blow that knocks the very breath from your lungs. The energy released is equivalent to millions of megatons of high explosives, vaporizing thousands of cubic miles of the great ice sheet in a single instant. A shockwave of compressed air rages across the landscape, flattening ancient forests and shattering the silence of the continent forever. You reach for your children, your fingers grasping for familiar skin, while the horizon turns into a wall of fire and dust. The great weight of the atmosphere seems to be pressing down on you with the force of a falling mountain. You notice the sky growing dark as a thick blanket of soot and ash begins to smother the light of the true sun. Continent-wide wildfires ignite in the wake of the thermal pulse, turning the grasslands and forests into a raging furnace from horizon to horizon. This is the moment the black mat begins to form a layer of carbon and death that will one day be found by curious minds thousands of years from now. You feel the texture of the falling cinders on your tongue, tasting the destruction of an entire ecosystem. The world you knew is being burned away, leaving only the raw struggle for air in a smoke-choked reality. You realize that the Earth is no longer a stable foundation, but a traumatized living thing, reeling from a cosmic assault. The cognitive bias that suggested the world was a permanent stage for human drama has been shattered by the random violence of the universe. You wonder if your sins or your prayers have any meaning when a stone falling from the dark void can rewrite history in a single afternoon. The human desire for power and belonging feels small and pathetic compared to the indifferent magnitude of the impact. You are living inside a geological instant that will haunt scientific debates for more than 12,000 years. You watch as the massive floods begin to roar down from the melting margins of the great ice sheet in the distant north. The energy of the impact has liquidated trillions of tons of frozen water, sending catastrophic outpourings racing toward the Atlantic Ocean. You feel the ground tremble with the movement of these new and violent rivers, carving the landscape into strange and unfamiliar shapes. The physical experience of this destruction is overwhelming, stripping away your connection to the territory you once knew by heart. You are a ghost in your own land, watching the world you loved be swept into the cold blue sea. You touch the fine dust settling on the leaves of the withering plants, finding tiny invisible diamonds that have formed under the extreme pressure of the blast. These nano-diamonds and platinum spikes will remain in the soil as the only witnesses to the fire that rained from above. You sense the metallic scent of the stars, in the air a tangy and alien aroma that does not belong in the fresh breeze of the tundra. This is the signature of the cosmic impact, a chemical mark left by a fragmenting comet that has decided the fate of the mammoths and the people who follow them. Every grain of sand is now a record of an extraterrestrial massacre. You reflect on the fragility of existence as you huddle with your kin in the suffocating darkness of the ash cloud. Human nature across time is anchored in this ability to endure the impossible, even when the very heavens turn hostile. You see the resilience in the eyes of your people, a quiet defiance that refuses to let the fire extinguish the spark of human awareness. The illusion of reality has been stripped away, leaving only the essential truth of breath and connection in a world that has gone cold and gray. You wonder if the meaning of life is found in this capacity to carry on through the cosmic dark. You feel a subtle modern connection to this ancient trauma, realizing that the Earth still moves through a shooting gallery of celestial debris. The people of the future will look to the skies with better eyes, tracking the tumbled stones of space to avoid the fate that is falling upon you right now. You are the ancestor of those who will one day master the stars, but today you are only a fragile life clinging to a charred continent. The cycle of growth and destruction is a wheel that never stops turning, and you are currently caught between the spokes. You settle into the darkness, waiting for the fires to burn themselves into a cold and silent end. Even the stars can become instruments of a sudden and final silence. Truth is often buried in the smallest grains of dust we step over every day. You wake up in a modern laboratory where the air is artificially cool and smells faintly of ozone and sterile paper. You are no longer surrounded by the raging wildfires of an ancient continent or the heavy scent of mammoth hide, but by the quiet hum of high-definition computers and the sharp white light of fluorescent tubes. You are a researcher in 2007, leaning over an electron microscope to examine a sample of Earth that was collected from a deep canyon in Arizona. The transition from the primal reality of the Ice Age to this controlled environment feels like a disorienting jump through time, yet the dirt beneath the lens is the same dirt that once smothered your ancestors. You feel the cold metal of the laboratory bench beneath your palms, grounding you in the present moment. You focus your attention on a thin layer of sediment known as the black mat, which appears in archaeological sites across North America like a buried funeral shroud. This dark band of Earth is rich in carbon and organic matter, representing the soot and ash of a continent that was set on fire 12,800 years ago. You notice how the texture of the soil changes abruptly from the sandy buff of the Pleistocene to this intense, oily blackness that marks the exact moment the world collapsed into cold. It is a physical scar on the face of the planet, a geographic boundary between an age of giants and an age of ghosts. You realize that this thin line of decay is the only written record remaining from the day the sky burned. You adjust the magnification of the microscope until tiny sparkling geometric structures appear on the screen like shards of fallen stars trapped in the mud. These are nanodiamonds, microscopic crystals so small that they can only be measured in billionths of a meter, formed under conditions of unimaginable pressure and temperature. Finding these specific diamonds in surface sediments is an impossibility under normal geological rules, suggesting that something from beyond our atmosphere slammed into the Earth with the force of 1,000,000 suns. You feel a sense of profound curiosity mixed with a subtle discomfort as you contemplate the benevolence required to create these invisible jewels. The illusion of a peaceful Earth is shattered by the presence of these extraterrestrial witnesses to a cosmic massacre. You examine the magnetic spherules, which are tiny iron orbs that once rained from the sky like burning, droplets of molten rock after the comet fragmented in the atmosphere. These spheres show signs of having been flash heated to over 2,200 degrees Celsius, a temperature that cannot be reached by ordinary forest fires or common volcanic eruptions. You touch the glass slide, feeling the weight of the scientific mystery that these iron beads represent in your hand. There is a strong cognitive bias within modern science to favor gradual explanations for every change. But these spherules demand a narrative of sudden and total catastrophe. You are reconstructing a crime scene where the victim was an entire ecosystem and the weapon was a messenger from the dark void of space. You review the data from the Greenland ice cores, where a sudden and massive spike in platinum concentrations appears at exactly the same depth as the younger Dryas cooling event. Platinum is an element that usually lives in the deep molten heart of our planet, far away from the crust, yet it is plentiful in the composition of comets and metallic asteroids. You see the graph on your monitor spiking upward like a silent scream recorded in the frozen water molecules of the Great Northern Ice Cap. This chemical signature is the smoking gun that links the disappearance of the Mammoths to a specific moment of celestial collision. The evidence is both exquisite in its precision and terrifying in its implications for the stability of our current world. You observe the internal conflict within the scientific community as many of your peers refuse to accept that a single event could rewrite the history of the planet so abruptly. The human desire for conformity to established truths often prevents us from seeing the chaos that actually governs the universe across vast stretches of deep time. You realize that history is not a smooth road but a series of sudden, dropping cliffs where everything we know can be swept away by a single stone falling from the dark. There is a philosophical layer to this research suggesting that human nature is to seek order in a reality that is frequently defined by random and indifferent violence. You watch the microscopic diamonds reflecting the harsh white light of your laboratory. You reflect on the modern connection between this ancient dust and the world you inhabit today, where we still look to the heavens with a mixture of wonder and fear. Every grain of soot in the black mat is a reminder that our civilizations are built over the graveyards of forgotten worlds that believed they were permanent. You wonder if future scientists will one day find the traces of your own life, pressed into a thin layer of sediment searching for the reason why your world eventually went silent. The meaning of life seems to be found in this relentless human need to uncover the truth, regardless of how uncomfortable it might make us feel. You settle into your chair feeling the infinite weight of 12,000 years pressing against your shoulders. The smallest speck of dust can sometimes hold the weight of an entire vanished world. Doubt is the silent architect of every lasting truth that the world has ever known. You walk into a different laboratory several months later feeling the cold weight of skepticism settling deep within your chest. The air is still and smells of the fine dust of ages as you prepare to replicate the findings that once shook the scientific world. You peer through the lens of a high-powered microscope, searching for the nano-diamonds that were promised to be the smoking gun of a cosmic murder. However, the screen remains stubbornly empty of falling stars, revealing only the ordinary grit of the Earth. There is a sinking feeling in your stomach as you realize that the extraordinary claim might be dissolving under the pressure of independent verification. You notice that other teams around the world are reporting the same frustrating silence in their own clean rooms and research facilities. Some laboratories do find the tiny diamonds, but they discover them in layers of soil that are thousands of years older or much younger than the predicted boundary. This suggests that these microscopic crystals are not unique to a comet impact, but might be the common waste of intense forest fires or volcanic eruptions. The cognitive bias to see a pattern in the chaos is a powerful human desire, yet the raw data refuses to conform to your expectations. You feel the psychological tension of a theory that is beginning to fray at the edges under close inspection. You examine the records of the charcoal and the ancient fires, finding that the burning did not happen in one single continental flash. The evidence shows fires igniting and fading over hundreds of years, in many different regions, suggesting a more complex and earthly explanation for the darkness in the soil. Droughts and climate shifts can set the world on fire just as effectively as a comet without requiring a dramatic intervention from the dark void. You realize that the meaning of life is often found in the slow and complicated truth rather than the simple and spectacular story. The illusion of a single catastrophe is being replaced by the reality of a planet struggling with change. You focus your mind on the black mat, finding that in some locations, this layer is not composed of ash or soot at all. Instead, it appears to be the remains of ancient wetlands and marshy bogs that formed when the water table rose during the abrupt cooling of the younger Dryas. The organic richness you once saw as evidence of a firestorm now looks like the slow accumulation of decaying vegetation in a drowning landscape. This physical experience of reinterpreting the evidence is disorienting, making you question every assumption you have made about the end of the Ice Age. You begin to realize that nature often hides its secrets behind multiple layers of possible meanings within the deep soil. You search the maps of the planet for the great crater that should have been left behind by an object large enough to chill the northern hemisphere. You look toward Greenland, at the massive Hiawatha crater, hidden beneath the thick ice, but the dating of the structures refuses to align perfectly with the 12,800-year mark. Without a definitive smoking gun or a clear impact site, the theory becomes a ghost story told in the technical language of chemistry. You feel the internal thought process of the scientific community shifting back toward the known and the familiar explanations. Freedom from error is a long and painful road that requires great patience and discipline over every century. You observe the intense debates in academic journals, where scientists exchange sharp critiques about statistical methods and sampling strategies. The human fear of being wrong or being deceived drives a level of rigor that can feel cold and unsympathetic to the beauty of a bold new idea. You notice how the desire for conformity to established theories acts as a weight on the progress of scientific innovation. Yet you also understand that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence that can stand up to the harshest lighting possible. The illusion of reality is often protected by the gates of consensus, which guard against the intrusion of unproven catastrophes and cosmic myths from the night sky. You review the chemical analysis of the platinum spikes, finding that in some locations the levels are not significantly higher than the normal background noise of the Earth. What once looked like a spike now appears to be a result of small sample sizes and the natural variability of mineral deposits over long stretches of time. This realization forces you to reevaluate the reliability of every chemical marker you have used to identify the presence of the comet. You experience a sense of discomfort as you recognize how easily the human mind can convince itself of a pattern where none exists. Reality is often far more mundane and quiet than our stories would have us believe in the laboratory. You sit in your quiet office, reflecting on the way that knowledge evolves through this endless cycle of proposal and refutation. The story of the younger Dryas is not a single straight line of discovery, but a tangled web of conflicting evidence and shifting interpretations. You sense a modern connection to this struggle in the way we try to understand the changes occurring in our own climate today. Every data point is a piece of a puzzle that never quite fits together, perfectly leaving room for both hope and doubt. You realize that the truth is not a destination, but a constant process of sifting through the shadows of the past for clues in the dust. You feel the weight of the thousands of years that separate you from the people who actually lived through this transition. Regardless of whether a comet hit the Earth or the oceans simply changed their course, the result for the humans of that time was a cold and terrifying reality. The specific cause matters less to the dead than the way in, which they met their fate with courage and adaptability. You contemplate the meaning of human nature across time, recognizing that we have always been defined by our need to explain the chaos that surrounds us. The stars are still above us, moving in their silent orbits, carrying both the potential for wonder and the threat of total destruction. Even a mountain of evidence can crumble into sand when viewed through the lens of perfection. The quietest movement of water can overthrow the loudest rain of fire. You stand on the silent edge of a frozen horizon where the land is not made of earth but of a solid and translucent wall of ancient blue ice. The silence here is heavy and absolute, pressed deep into your ears by the weight of 2 miles of glacial pressure, resting upon the ancient bedrock for thousands of years. You hear a low subterranean groan like the sound of a sleeping giant stirring in the dark, which is the deep shifting of the Laurentide ice sheet. Tiny rivulets of crystal-clear meltwater are gathering in small depressions, forming pools that reflect the pale and infinite Arctic sky with a haunting and spectral clarity. You feel a sense of immense curiosity about where this liquid life is destined to flow as the world begins its long and dangerous thaw. You walk toward the trembling margin where the ice meets the vast inland sea known to future scientists as Lake Agassiz, a body of water larger than any ocean you can imagine. It stretches far beyond the curve of the Earth, its surface dotted with massive icebergs that drift like ghostly white sentinels in the cold gray light of the morning. This great reservoir is held back only by a fragile and unstable dam of frozen soil and brittle ice, creating a physical tension that you can feel vibrating through the soles of your hide boots. There is a growing discomfort in your very marrow as you realize that this enormous volume of fresh water is poised like a loaded weapon against the throat of the entire planet. The atmosphere is thick with the scent of cold, wet stone and the primal fear of a coming collapse. You witness the exact moment the dam finally fails, not with a roar but with a sudden and sickening crack that echoes across the tundra like a thunderclap from the underworld. A wall of cold, fresh water rushes toward the North Atlantic, carving deep and jagged gorges into the landscape and sweeping away whole forests in a matter of terrible hours. This is the Great Meltwater Pulse, a catastrophic injection of sweet water into the salty and ancient veins of the global ocean system. You watch the rushing torrent, feeling the internal thought process of a world being reorganized by the blind and indifferent laws of physics. The velocity of the water is a terrifying reminder that nature does not negotiate with the stable realities we imagine for our lives. You see the very soil of the continent being stripped away by the pure power of the flood. You sense the great ocean current known as the Atlantic Meridian overturning circulation beginning to stutter and stall in the far north. The dense and salty water that once sank into the deep is now floating on a layer of buoyant fresh meltwater, shutting down the conveyor belt of global heat. This is the invisible engine of the Northern Hemisphere, turning off, leaving you in a silence that is colder and deeper than any winter you have ever experienced. You experience the primal human fear of survival as you realize the warmth of the Gulf Stream has vanished like a small flame, extinguished by a sudden and violent flood. The illusion of a constant climate is swept away by this saline betrayal in the deep blue sea. You feel the air temperature dropping before your very eyes as the heat retreats toward the south. You reflect on the meaning of life in a system where the smallest shift in salinity can trigger the total collapse of entire civilizations over 10 generations. Human nature across time is always seeking a solid ground to stand upon, while the oceans are rearranging the very map of existence beneath our tired feet. There is a subtle modern connection in your thoughts, realizing how our own fragile balance depends on the continued movement of these deep and invisible rivers in the Atlantic. You wonder if freedom is simply the brief interlude between one great flood and the next frozen silence of the planet. Reality is a delicate fabric woven from the threads of water and salt and the unrelenting pressure of gravity. You realize that to live is to exist at the mercy of currents you can neither see nor control. You observe the sky above the North Atlantic, where the clouds are turning thick and leadened with the moisture of the dying current. The birds that once followed the warm winds are nowhere to be seen, leaving a void in the air that is filled only by the sound of the cold waves crashing against the ice. You feel the internal pressure of conformity within your group as everyone huddles, together seeking a warmth that the sun is no longer providing. This is the psychology of the cold, where every individual thought is consumed by the urgent necessity of keeping the body alive. You look out at the rushing water, realizing that the map of your world has been erased in a single season of melting and fluting. The experience of time seems to slow down as the world turns into a white and silent portrait of endurance. You touch the surface of the ocean, finding that it no longer tastes of the salt that once marked its power, but of the sweet and cold absence of the ice. This change in chemistry is the secret cause of the 1,200-year winter that is about to settle over your people. You contemplate the illusion of power that you felt while hunting mammoths, realizing that a simple shift in the density of water is more powerful than all the spears in the world. The human desire for power is a small and fading thing compared to the global mechanics of the ocean and the atmosphere. You sink down into the soft tundra, feeling the resilience of your spirit, even as your physical reality is stripped of its comforts. The meaning of existence is found in this quiet acceptance of the planetary will. You imagine the generations of the future studying the sediments on the ocean floor to reconstruct this specific moment of disaster and transition. They will find the small fossils of plankton that preferred the fresh water over the salt, marking the exact year the conveyor belt stalled. You sense a connection to those future minds, realizing that we are all bound by the same need to understand why the world suddenly turns cold. Your survival in this moment is the foundation upon which their curiosity will eventually be built thousands of years from now. The narrative of the planet is a long and interconnected song that is written in the water as much as in the fire. You close your eyes, feeling the first true snow of the younger Dryas beginning to fall on your shoulders in the silence. Even the deepest ocean current is merciful only until the balance of the salt is lost to the ice. The loss of a monarch is felt most in the silence that follows their final breath. You walk across the Great Plains of North America, but the horizon feels strangely empty and light compared to the years of your youth. The massive rhythms of the tundra are no longer dictated by the thunderous footsteps of the Colombian mammoths or the high browsing of the mastodons in the forest margins. You notice the silence most of all, a profound lack of the grinding teeth and low frequency, trumpeting that once defined the atmospheric texture of this continent. Roughly 35 genera of large mammals have begun to vanish from the record of the soil, leaving behind only fragments of bone and the heavy absence of their presence. This physical experience of walking through a quieter world creates a subtle tension in your chest as you search for the life that used to anchor your reality. You feel the weight of the human fear of survival as you realize that the kings of the Ice Age are no longer providing the meat and hide that sustained your people for millennia. The overkill hypothesis suggests that your own kind, equipped with sharp Clovis points and coordinated intelligence, might have pushed these giants toward the edge of total extinction. You contemplate the possibility that the arrival of a clever bipedal predator was the final weight added to a system already overloaded by a rapidly shifting climate. There is a deep discomfort in considering that your success as a hunter might be directly linked to the irreversible death of an entire biological lineage. You watch the tall yellow grass swaying in the cold wind, feeling like a stranger in a land you once mastered with ease. You observe the struggling predators like the saber-toothed cats and the American lions as they prowl through the thickets, looking for prey that is no longer there. Their great canine teeth are useless instruments when the massive bodies they were designed to subdue have disappeared into the dust of the emerging younger Dryas. The cascading collapse of the ecosystem is visible in the starving ribs of the dire wolves and the stunted growth of the giant ground sloths that still linger in scattered refuges. You sense the cognitive bias that once suggested these monsters were immortal, realizing now that even the mightiest hearts can be stilled by the pressure of a changing world. The illusion of stability is replaced by the sensory detail of a starving land, where the hunters have become the haunted. You touch the cold bark of a tree, realizing that the entire landscape is being rewired without the engineering presence of the great mammoths. Without their constant trampling and browsing, the forests are beginning to encroach upon the open grasslands, changing the very soil and the way that energy flows through the living earth. You experience a moment of calm awareness, recognizing that the extinction of the giants is not just a loss of animals, but a transformation of the entire narrative of the continent. The meaning of human nature across time is often defined by our capacity to step into the empty spaces left behind by those who could not adapt to the breaking world. You notice how the shadows of the moving clouds seem to mimic the ghostly shapes of the herds that are no longer there. You consider the scientific debate that suggests a perfect storm of factors led to this continental silence rather than a single hammer blow from space or stone. Rapid climate change likely weakened the populations, fragmenting their habitats and reducing their numbers until only a few isolated groups remained, in vulnerable refuges. Then human hunters arrived, applying the final fatal pressure to a system that was already wobbling under the stress of the returning cold. This synergistic effect is a haunting reflection on how multiple small pressures can align to create a finality that none of them could achieve alone. You feel the rough texture of a fossilized tusk in the creek bed, realizing it is both a tool and a grave marker for a vanished age. You experience the internal thought process of a forager who must now learn to value smaller game and different plants to keep your family alive through the long winters. The large-scale cooperation required to bring down a mammoth is being replaced by the patient stealth needed to hunt deer and trap smaller mammals in the expanding thickets. This shift in desire and practice is a slow descent into a new historical reality where the scale of life has shrunk to fit a more fragile ecosystem. You notice the absence of the scavengers who once cleaned the plains, finding that the air smells differently without the massive carcasses that once fed the short-faced bears. The world is becoming cleaner, colder, and increasingly unfamiliar to your primitive senses. You look to the south, realizing that, even in warmer regions, the giants are fading into the shadows of the past at different rates and for different reasons. In South America, the armored glyptodons and giant sloths are facing their own crossroads between shifting vegetation and the arrival of new predators like you. This global pattern of extinction is a psychological burden that you carry across the continent, recognizing that your own expansion is inseparably bound to the shrinking of other worlds. You wonder if life truly has a meaning when success leads to the emptying of the landscape you love. The conformity of your tribe to these new strategies is the only path toward a future that no longer features the magnificent trumpeting of the great Pleistocene monarchs. You stand by the fire at night, watching the sparks rise into the cold dark, thinking of the stories you will tell your children about the animals they will never see. You will speak of the mountainous mammoths and the saber-toothed ghosts, creating a mythology out of the very real creatures that once walked beside you in the sun. This is the birth of legend in the shadow of loss, where human imagination fills the voids left by the physical disappearance of the natural order. You feel a modern connection to this ancient sorrow, realizing that our own stories are often attempts to preserve the spirit of things that we have lost to time and progress. The silence of the plain is not an absence, but a presence of everything that used to be. You breathe in the sharp, cold air, feeling your own lungs expanding in the space where larger lungs once labored beneath the weight of the ice. The meaning of life in this transition is found in the quiet resilience of those who remain to witness the emptying of the world. You realize that freedom is a heavy gift, purchased at the cost of the majestic, complicated reality that came before you. The great giants have departed into the soil, leaving you with the responsibility of crafting a new narrative for a planet that is still finding its way back to the sun. You settle into the stillness, feeling the ghostly weight of the mammoth footsteps echoing in the subconscious depths of your memory as you drift toward sleep. The emptiness of the plain is the only monument left to the monarchs who once ruled the frozen grass. A single style cannot hold a continent that is breaking into 1,000 different pieces. You wake up to a morning where the tools of your grandparents no longer fit the hands of your children. The large and elegant fluted points of the Clovis era once linked the entire continent in a shared language of stone and survival across thousands of miles. But as the younger Dryas cold settles over the land, Like a heavy gray shroud, the universal designs of the past begin to fragment into local dialects of flint and chert. You notice that the majestic uniformity of your ancient culture is dissolving into a patchwork of regional strategies, each one carefully tuned to the specific demands of a narrowing and harsher world. This change is not a failure of craftsmanship, but a necessary evolution in a landscape that is rapidly losing its predictable rhythms. You feel the physical weight of a fulsome point in your hand, noticing how it is thinner and more delicate than the heavy blades used to bring down the great mammoths. This new tool is designed for the incredible speed of the Great Plains bison, a quicker and more agile prey that requires a different kind of precision and hunting strategy. You observe the subtle variations in shape and flaking technique, feeling a deep curiosity about how other bands of humans are solving the same problems of hunger and cold. The internal thought process of your people is shifting from the pursuit of giants to the careful management of whatever life remains in the shrublands. Every new shape carved into stone is a recorded decision to survive a specific environmental difficulty. You notice that the busy campsites of your ancestors have become quiet and isolated places where the smoke of a shared fire is no longer a common sight on the horizon. In some regions of the Northeast, the archaeological record thins out like a breath vanishing into the bitter winter air as people retreat toward more reliable and sheltered refuges. There is a growing sense of discomfort in this spatial thinning, realizing that your social networks are shrinking just as the physical environment is becoming more hostile. The human fear of isolation is a heavy shadow that follows you across the frozen valleys, where the sound of other human voices is becoming a rare and precious treasure. You wonder if your lineage is fading into the great silence of the returning ice. You find yourself transported to a different frontier in the Near East, where the Natufian people are facing their own version of the younger Dryas cold in the high desert. You are crouched in a small stone house grinding wild cereals like wheat and barley on a heavy basalt slab, feeling the physical texture of the seeds turning to rough flour. Before the cold struck, your people were beginning to stay in one place for the entire cycle of the season's learning, the secrets of the earth and the rhythms of the harvest. But now the rain patterns are changing and the wild grasses are becoming unpredictable and scarce in the windswept hills. You feel the immersion into a crisis that demands a new kind of ingenuity beyond the simple act of foraging. You feel the tension of a culture, caught between the memory of a settled life and the hard necessity of returning to the wanderer's difficult path through the dust. Some villages are shrinking or falling into ruin as people range more widely to find the sparse food that the cooling landscape is refusing to provide in one single place. There is a cognitive bias within your group to cling to the old ways of gathering even as the environment shifts toward an erratic and unforgiving state. Yet you notice that the knowledge of the seeds is not being forgotten, but is being concentrated and refined through these centuries of intense hardship. This struggle is the crucible in which the first careful thoughts of deliberate planting are beginning to smolder like embers. You reflect on human nature across time, recognizing that we are often defined not by the stability of our empires, but by our flexibility. During the great transitions of the earth, the disappearance of the Clovis toolkit in North America and the shift in Natufian life in the Levant are not disasters but vital hinge points in the global human story. You realize that meaning is often found in the ability to abandon what no longer works in order to hold onto the essence of who you are. The illusion of reality suggests that culture is a permanent monument when, in truth, it is a living and breathing response to the challenges of the atmosphere. You feel a quiet satisfaction in the resilience of your kind. You sense a modern connection to this ancient period of adaptation, realizing that we still live in a world where regional solutions are often the only way to address global collapses. The fulsome hunters and the early farmers of the Near East were the true pioneers of a strategy that still governs our lives today in the face of technological or environmental uncertainty. You wonder if freedom is simply the ability to choose your own path through the deep snow, when the old highways have been buried by the sudden whims of the climate. The cognitive complexity of these ancient people is written in every discarded flake of stone and every grinding bowl hidden beneath the sands. You are the beneficiary of their refusal to vanish. You experience the psychological depth of a species that carries its history not in books, but in the very shape of its survival tools and the shared stories. The ending of the Clovis era marks the beginning of a more diverse and specialized human presence across the immense map of the Americas. You contemplate the meaning of success, realizing that it often looks like a contraction or a narrowing before it can become a new kind of global abundance. Human nature is to build a future out of the fragments of a shattered past, carrying the seeds of one world into the fertile soil of the next. You close your eyes, feeling the quiet strength of those who stayed, while the world turned into a stranger. The hand that learns to hold a seed is just as brave as the hand that once held a spear against a giant. Truth is a moving target that we chase through the dark rooms of our own history. You sit in a room where the only sound is the quiet hum of a computer fan and the steady thrum of the air conditioning. The light is sharp and unforgiving, reflected off the polished white surfaces of a world that prefers data to dreams. You lean forward, feeling the pressure of the desk against your forearms as you stare at a digital screen filled with jagged lines and colorful maps. This is where the younger Dryas lives today, hidden within the binary code of climate models and the chemical signatures of ancient mud. You realize that you are a detective searching for a killer who vanished 12,800 years ago. You peer into the depths of an electron microscope, watching the gray landscape of a soil sample reveal its most intimate secrets. You are looking for the tiny spheres of melted iron and the invisible dust of nano-diamonds that once rained from a burning sky. There is a persistent human desire to find a single dramatic answer to the mystery of why the giants disappeared and the world went cold. Yet as you search, you feel the psychological weight of every study that failed to replicate these findings in other laboratories around the globe. The truth feels like a ghost that slips through your fingers just as you reach to touch it. You run a simulation of the North Atlantic currents, watching the ribbons of warm water stall and fade as fresh meltwater pours from a virtual ice sheet. The graphic representations of temperature show a sudden cliff where the stability of the planet simply ends, falling into a 1,200-year void of ice. You notice how fragile this system truly is, realizing that a minor shift in salinity can trigger a global catastrophe in less time than it takes to grow to adulthood. This physical realization of vulnerability creates a subtle tension in your chest as you connect these ancient graphs to the uncertain weather outside your own window. You observe the intense debates in the scientific journals, feeling the heat of the arguments that flare up whenever a new study is published. Some call the impact hypothesis a beautiful myth, while others insist that the evidence in the soil is undeniable and final. This internal conflict is part of the human nature to seek order and meaning in a reality that is frequently chaotic and indifferent. You realize that science is not a collection of fixed truths, but a messy and argumentative process of sifting through the ash of the past. The illusion of certainty is a comfort that neither the ice nor the stars will ever truly provide. You consider the perspective of the cautious agnostics who refuse to accept a single cause for the collapse of the Pleistocene world. Perhaps it was not only a comet or only a flood, but a cascading series of pressures that all hit the system at once. You think of the mammoths struggling through fragmented habitats and the humans adapting their tools to a changing reality. Human nature across time is anchored in this ability to survive the intersection of multiple disasters regardless of their origin. The meaning of life seems to be found in the resilience of the species that keeps asking questions while the world shifts beneath them. You look at the data from the surveys of near-Earth objects, realizing that the planet moves through a shooting gallery of cosmic debris. The scars of ancient impacts are written into the rock and the ice, reminding you that the sky is not just a backdrop for our drama but an active participant in our fate. There is a modern connection in your work as you catalog the threats from above while trying to understand the currents from below. You feel a quiet reflection on the fact that every civilization is just a brief interlude of warmth between the long winters of the great Earth cycles. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the continuity of the human experience stretching back to those who first saw the fire in the sky. Whether the hammer was made of ice or stone, the response of the heart remains the same in every age. You contemplate the fragility of your own world, realizing that knowledge is a layered sediment of failures, successes, and enduring curiosities. The search for the truth about the younger Dryas is a way to honor those who lived through it, bearing witness to their struggle for survival. You settle back into your chair, ready to continue the long and patient work of reading the Earth's memory. The answer is not found in the loudest argument, but in the quiet patience of the soil. The sun is not a new arrival, but a friend who has finally remembered your name. You wake up to a sensation that you have not felt in over 1,000 years of genetic memory, a true and unyielding warmth that does not retreat when the wind blows from the north. The bitter and relentless grip of the younger Dryas is finally beginning to loosen its fingers from the throat of the planet as the climate light switch flips once more toward the light. You notice the sound of water changing its tone from the brittle crack of shifting ice to the continuous and musical rushing of a world that is liquidating its sorrow. This abrupt warming is even more violent and sudden than the cooling that began the great winter, rising by 10 degrees Celsius within the span of only a few human years. You feel the immersion into a new reality where the very air seems to be expanding, with the promise of a future that is no longer locked in white. You walk through the thawing tundra, noticing how the resilient Arctic flowers like the Dryas octopetala are being slowly crowded out by the return of tall grasses and hardy birch trees. The physical experience of this transition is overwhelming as you see the world rewinding its own catastrophe in a matter of decades rather than centuries. The massive glaciers that once marched southward are now retreating in a final and decisive defeat, leaving behind a scoured landscape of new lakes and virgin soil. You feel a sense of profound curiosity about what this reborn continent will become without the presence of the giant monarchs who once ruled the frozen plains. The internal thought process of your people is shifting from the desperate psychology of the huddled campfire to the bold exploration of a world without end. You are the witness to the birth of the Holocene. You experience a subtle tension within your own body as you realize that survival is a habit that is difficult to break even when the danger has finally passed. For over 50 generations, your ancestors have lived within the iron rhythms of the cold, learning to fear the wind and to value every scrap of fuel. Now, the abundance of the warming earth feels almost intoxicating and dangerous, as if the sun might change its mind once more and plunge you back into the darkness. This cognitive bias toward the cold is a weight you carry into the new era, a mental scar from 1,000 years of enduring the impossible. You watch your children running through the tall grass, realizing that they will never truly understand the silence of the great ice that once smothered your history. Your desire for safety is being replaced by a growing sense of freedom that feels as vast as the horizon. You reflect on the transformation of your own human nature as you adapt your tools and your stories to this permanent summer. In the Near East, you see the communities moving down from the hills to build larger and more permanent villages near the fertile floodplains of rejuvenated rivers. The knowledge of the seeds, gathered during the hardest winters, of the younger Dryas is now being planted into the warm soil, creating the foundation for the first farms in human history. In North America, your people are diversifying into 1,000 different cultures, each one finding its own harmony within the mountains, the coasts, and the Great Plains. The meaning of life is no longer just about avoiding death, but about investing your intelligence into the earth to create a legacy that will last for millennia. You realize that the cold was not just a destroyer, but a teacher that forced your kind to become more than you ever thought possible. You notice a modern connection to this moment of rapid warming, realizing that we are still a species defined by our ability to thrive in the wake of planetary upheaval. The Earth has always been a place of abrupt transitions and violent changes, yet the human spirit has consistently found a way to turn catastrophe into a catalyst for growth. You contemplate the fact that your existence is the direct result of those who refuse to give up during the 1,200 years of the Great Winter. There is a calm awareness in this thought, recognizing that you are part of an unbroken chain of resilience that has survived fire, ice, and the falling of the stars. The reality of the present is a gift purchased by the incredible endurance of the past. You breathe in the warm, sweet air of the new world, feeling the rhythmic beating of a heart that has finally found its home in the light. The greatest victories of history are often won not in the heat of battle, but in the patient keeping of a flame through a long and frozen night. The past is not a dead thing, but a living puzzle that changes every time we look at it. You find yourself in a modern corridor where the echoes of the Ice Age are trapped within steel cabinets and digitized files. The scientific battle over the younger Dryas is not a dispute over dry facts, but a search for the truth of our own vulnerability. You watch researchers locking horns in the bright light of international conferences, their voices rising and falling like the ancient tides of the North Atlantic. There is a human desire to find a single villain in this story, to point a finger at a comet or a flood and say, "Here is why the world broke." Yet the more you dig into the mud, the more you realize that reality is often a tangled web of many small deaths. You feel the psychological depth of this mystery, realizing that perhaps every theory holds a fragment of the broken mirror. Maybe the comet did strike the great ice sheets, igniting the forests while the resulting melt water poured into the sea to stall the deep ocean currents. You imagine the stressed mammoths already struggling with the shifting climate facing, the final pressure of human hunters, armed with sharp stone points of impossible precision. This integration of forces is a complex narrative suggesting that catastrophe is a perfect alignment of many pressures rather than one single blow. The cognitive bias to simplify the world into simple cause and effect is a comfort that the data consistently refuses. You sense the interconnectedness of every living thing. You realize that the intense disagreement between the scientists is not a failure but the very heart of how we discover the truth. Both sides publish papers and examine the same grains of dust reaching different conclusions in a process that sharpens our understanding of the ancient earth. This intellectual tension is part of human nature, our need to solve the great riddles of our existence through logic and rigor. You sense the immersion into a debate that transcends individual egos, moving toward a collective awareness of our place in time. You feel a calm awareness in recognizing that we are not separate from this history, but are the continuing chapter of an ongoing story. The truth is not a destination, but the very act of searching. We search for the smoke because we still feel the heat of that ancient fire. The earth is a library of secrets where every grain of sand is a volume waiting to be read. You stand at the far end of a bridge, 12,800 years long, looking back through the fog of deep time. The world you inhabit today is not a random gift, but a legacy of resilience forged in the crucible of that long and frozen night. You recognize that every comfort of your modern life is built upon the dust of the mammoths and the courage of the Clovis hunters who refused to fade into the silence. The internal thought process of your species is a continuous thread of adaptation, stretching from the edge of the ice sheet to the glowing screens of your cities. You realize that the history of the earth is not something you study, but something you carry within your very cells. You feel the deep psychological pull of your ancestors as you drift towards sleep, recognizing their desire for security in your own search for peace. The human nature to conform to the rhythms of the seasons is a direct inheritance from those who learned to read the shifting patterns of the sky and the water. You understand that the illusion of reality you maintain in your daily life is just as fragile as the one that vanished when the world suddenly went cold. This realization does not bring fear, but a calm awareness of your participation in a great and ancient drama. You are part of a living chain of minds that have always sifted through the ash for the seeds of a better tomorrow. You contemplate the multiple truths that have emerged from the darkness of the younger Dryas, recognizing that fire and ice are not enemies, but partners in change. Perhaps the comet did fall to shatter the heavens, while the great lakes drained to silence the deep currents of the sea. In this philosophical layer, you see that the meaning of life is not found in identifying a single villain, but in appreciating the complexity of our interconnected world. Every platinum spike and every ancient tool is a sentence in a story that is still being written by the inquisitive hands of your kind. You feel the resonance of this complexity within your own mind as you navigate the many layers of your own history. You look to the heavens tonight, knowing that the shooting gallery of space is still open and the currents of the ocean are still moving beneath the waves. The modern connection to the Ice Age is a subtle reminder that we are not outside of nature, but are always subject to its abrupt and decisive whims. You wonder if your civilization is a permanent monument, or simply another interlude of warmth in the long cycle of the great planetary thaw. The freedom you enjoy today is a precious currency that was purchased by the endurance of those who faced the great winter without a map or a guarantee. You feel a profound gratitude for the simple stability of the earth beneath your feet. You sense the resilience of the human spirit as the ultimate tool that no catastrophe can ever fully destroy or bury in the soil. Whether we faced the teeth of a saber-toothed cat or the cold silence of a stalled ocean, our response has always been to innovate, to cooperate, and to keep telling our story. The meaning of your life is anchored in this ability to carry the fire through the darkness, to turn destruction into a new beginning for those who follow. You realize that human nature across time is defined by this audacious will to exist, even when the very stars seem to turn against our survival. The mystery of the past is the mirror in which we see our own incredible capacity for change. You let your thoughts soften and scatter like the dust settling at the bottom of an ancient lake, resting securely in the knowledge that you are part of this eternal flow. The silence of the night is not an absence of meaning but a space where the echoes of the vanished giants and the ancient hunters can finally rest beside you. You breathe with the rhythm of the earth, its long cycles of ice and sun moving in perfect sync with the beating of your own heart. There is no more need for arguments or evidence in this moment, only the gentle descent into the peace of a world that has found its balance once more. You are safe within the narrative of deep time. The story of the earth is a song that never ends even when the singer has fallen silent. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the shadows of our ancient past to uncover the mysteries of the younger Dryas. If you found comfort and insight in these chapters, please gently tap the like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a narrative journey through the history of our world. For those who wish to help us continue crafting these deep explorations, we warmly invite you to join our YouTube membership program to support the channel directly. Your presence here is the flame that keeps this story alive in the vast cold of the universe. If the world you knew ended tomorrow, which piece of human knowledge would you fight to carry into the new dark?